Welcome into the Late Night Gamecock Show. I am your host, Matthew Anderson, and joined as always by my co-host, Alex Jones of thebigspur.com. Obviously, today was a very big day in a lot of ways. National Signing Day. I know it's still weird that National Signing Day is now in December, but Carolina's class is pretty much done, and Alex and I will talk all about that. We're also going to be talking a little bit of basketball. Gamecocks did have a big win last night at Virginia Tech. So we'll talk a little bit about basketball, where the men's team is going. Obviously, the women's team's in the throes of their non-conference schedule as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the college football playoff. I know that it makes everybody sick to their stomach right now. And Shane Beamer had some things to say about it today. So we're going to do all of that on this show. And we are so thankful for all of you to join us tonight. Alex, hit the intro.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Welcome back in, everyone. Tonight, we're going to start the show talking about basketball. Alex, last night, I don't think you made the trip to Boston College, but the Gamecocks did have a convincing win, 73-51 over the Boston College. I think they're the Eagles or something like that.
Yeah.
Boston College Eagles. This game in particular, I thought was the best game South Carolina has played defensively this entire season. To go into a road environment in an SEC, ACC showdown type matchup, to find a way to build a pretty substantial lead at halftime. And I talk about this a lot when I look at KenPom kind of breaks it down into quarters. And if you look at the first 10-ish minutes of the game, Gamecocks were up 16-13. So do quick math there. That's a 3-point lead. But then they finished the first half on a 20-6 run to take a 17-point halftime lead. The game was really never in question after that. Gamecocks ended up winning by 22 points. I think one of the big takeaways from last night's game is Colin Murray-Boyle is still Colin Murray-Boyles. Just an absolutely phenomenal player, and Gamecock fans and coaches are very happy that he is a part of their team. But I will say that over the last couple of games, specifically, the Gamecocks have got it going from long range. And that's one of the issues that's plagued South Carolina over the start of their season. But if you look at the Virginia Tech game and the Boston College game, Boston College last night, the Gamecocks shot 10 of 19 from the three-point line. That was good for a 52.6% clip. And then in the Virginia Tech game, the Gamecocks shot 11 of 32, which was 34%. So right now, when you kind of look at where the Gamecocks are at, they are 5-3 overall. Of the three losses they have, obviously the North Florida one still stings the most, not only for Gamecock fans who are excited for the start of the season, but also for the computer rankings, the net rankings, the KenPoms, all of that. Will likely be a quad 3, quad 4 loss at the end of the season. At this point, it is what it is, and the Gamecocks have found a way to regroup. You look at the South Carolina State game, the Gamecocks won by 20-plus points. The Towson game, the Gamecocks won by 20-plus points. The Boston College game, the Gamecocks won by 20-plus points. They also had a double-digit victory over Virginia Tech and Mercer. So in the wins, the Gamecocks have looked like a pretty daggum good team. And I say all the time, when you look at possessions in a game, a 20-point win is beating a team by 7 possessions. That's pretty good. The North Florida loss still stings. The Indiana loss, it's an ugly box score at the end of the day, but I do think the Gamecocks played better in the second half to only lose by 16. And then the Xavier game, it was a 9-point loss, and you're talking about 3 possessions. So while I think the Gamecocks would have loved to have taken one of those Indiana or Mercer games and obviously the North Florida game, you're kind of looking at the best case scenario for the Gamecocks outside of the absolute best case. So we'll call it the second tier best case for the Gamecocks. They're 5-3 right now. They're through the tough part of their non-conference. If you're just looking at the teams they've played so far, the next big test for the Gamecocks will come against Clemson, and that game is scheduled for Tuesday, December 17th. Right now, according to KenPom, the Gamecocks would be a 2-point underdog in that game. But what's great for the Gamecocks right now, Alex, before they get to SEC play, is their next 5 games are at home. So you look at, 10-3 in the non-conference, that's pretty good. 9-4 in the non-conference, when you have the opportunities that you're going to have in the SEC, still pretty good. Alex, I know that you were talking about some metrics earlier on the Big Spur, or maybe you just texted it to me, but tell everybody where the Gamecocks moved in the net.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I mean, kind of going back to that Boston College game last night, I thought that was really South Carolina's, best game of the year. I think, you and I have kind of talked about it a little bit that, I think defensively they're really starting to come in. It's really starting to show what, Lamont Paris wants in, a South Carolina defense. You kind of saw a little bit of last year's defense coming back in to that game last night. And, you mentioned Kyler Murray Bowles. I mean, that guy, he just continues to play well and lead this team. And, South Carolina in the net, because of that win, went up from 135 to 90 in the net, which still really early to talk about the net right now. But, from going from 135 to 90 with a win over Boston College, that still kind of gets you back a little bit closer. And I think you have kind of talked about this, how, the net and the KenPom are a little kind of like it's all kind of work itself out. Like South Carolina, if they continue to handle their business, wasn't going to stay in the 130s. So, that kind of stuff continues to work itself out. And, kind of going back again to last night's game, I thought, talking about Kyler Murray Bulls, but you mentioned the 3-point shooting that's starting to improve, and going 10-19 last night was really good. And, Morris Ugasuk is 3 for 3, and he's really showing that he's taking the next step in his game. And, one stat that also kind of stands out in a good way, I guess, is South Carolina only, turned it over 10 times in the game last night. That's needs to continue to get better, but it's better than what they have been. But when you look back at it, Kyler Murray Bowles had accounted for 5 of those turnovers last night. So, it's one of those where he's not going to turn it over 5 times every game. So, I think South Carolina's really starting to, things are starting to click for them kind of on both ends of the floor. And I think the way they've been playing defensively is helping them kind of continue to improve offensively.
And one of the things when you talk about the net versus like a KenPom or an Evan Mia or Bart Torvik is KenPom actually takes in the last 5 years of data in the preseason when he starts making his metrics.
Yeah.
So the net is different. The net only takes into account this season so far. And so when you're talking about where the Gamecocks were maybe after the Virginia Tech win, they had only played 7 games. And they were going against other teams that have probably only played 7 or 8 games. And, I say this all the time when I talk about like early net stuff, Alex, and I think I mentioned it to you as well. I think I mentioned on the Big Spur, but it always favors the mid-majors because without fail, there are some mid-majors, there are some Charleston Southerns of the world that beat a Miami team where they have no business beating them, but they do. And let's all not forget that Charleston Southern gave South Carolina everything they could last year. And Charleston Southern just beat Miami over the weekend on Saturday. So when you look at those numbers, just remember the net is going to be funky because if a mid-major team has a 5-point loss to a Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky, they're going to get a lot of credit. So over the course of the season, once those schedules kind of level out, and the mid-majors start playing against worse competition, you see those teams drop. I will say, though, in regard to KenPom, the Gamecocks opened KenPom at 67th in the country, and they fell as low as 83rd in the country after their loss to North Florida. And the Gamecocks now sit at 68. So all things considered, where KenPom had the Gamecocks is essentially where they still are. So the Gamecocks still have everything in front of them. So many opportunities here for some wins. I mean, just looking at it, KenPom outside of the Clemson game, they have the Gamecocks predicted to win by 10 plus points in every single game. So maybe you can breathe easy a little bit. You can enjoy Gamecock men's basketball over the next couple of weeks before we get to the new year and conference tournament play. I am going to pull up the women's schedule, Alex, really quick, just to kind of talk through it. Let me go ahead and find the rankings. Obviously, South Carolina women had a tough loss to UCLA. Alex and I think we touched on it on a show, but the Gamecock, the women's team, is now ranked third in the country. They're 7-1, and I do think it's important to note that despite the ugly loss to UCLA, which ended up being by 15 points, they did rally back and beat number 15 Iowa State 76-36. So a 40-point win over Iowa State, who's ranked 15th in the country. And then they beat Purdue 99-51. I think that, especially in the women's game, where the upper echelon of teams are so much better than everybody else, that when you do play a team that's equally as talented as you in some respects, you kind of get a wake-up call. But the women's team has definitely rebounded. They do play tomorrow night against Duke, and I believe that game is in Colonial Life Arena. So that's 9 o'clock on ESPN. Duke's ranked 8th in the country. So if you are in Columbia, make sure you get over to Colonial Life Arena tomorrow night. If you're in the surrounding areas, get there, support the women's team, because that is a big matchup. And then they follow that up with TCU, who's ranked 9th in the country. So it's kind of weird to say, Alex, but the early non-conference slate for the women's team is probably going to be tougher than the SEC schedule for them.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, and I think Don Staley kind of intentionally does that to get the team ready for, their run through that SEC schedule and then into March Madness. And obviously we've seen it's worked with the way South Carolina's played and the national championships they've won. So, it's going to build that team up to get them ready to make a run through the SEC and once again try to make a run all the way through March.
So we're definitely going to get to National Signing Day. But Alex, before we get there and before we take a break, let's quickly touch on the college football playoffs, the rankings that came out last night. Obviously, the Gamecocks only jumped one spot in the poll. That has been talked about ad nauseum, not just by Gamecock fans and supporters, but by national media folks. Honestly, Alex, I think that it is just truly an indictment on the college football playoff committee. It doesn't make much sense. And, Shane Beamer had a good point today. If he hears that Ward guy say data point one more time, he's going to barf, because the data points just don't make sense. When you talk about comparing Alabama to Miami, and he talked about Alabama's winning record against teams above 500 and then compared to Miami, and then he doesn't talk about Alabama's record against teams sub 500. It's kind of a weird thing to say. But Alex, just overall general takes on the college football playoff rankings, and do you think that South Carolina still has any way to get into playoffs with the national media kind of rallying behind them?
I don't think so. With what you heard from Ward Manuel when he said that the conference championship games aren't, if you're not playing this week, there's not another data point for those teams, and which I don't know if I understand, because you think about it, and Shane Beamer kind of said this today, if Clemson goes and wins the ACC championship, then South Carolina has a road win in a big rivalry game against the ACC champion. How does that not help you? And I think, when the committee chair is going to say stuff like that, it's going to make it to where conference championship games really don't matter much. And also it's going to make it to where I think coaches don't want to get into the conference championship, because, and I think that brings it to the next question of what happens with like an SMU. If SMU goes and loses to Clemson, are they falling out of the playoff? And because I think they should, to be honest, like if they lose that game, I think they should be out of the playoff. But are they? Because are they going to not punish SMU for that?
So I have two different ways of thinking about it. One, when you talk about not scheduling people because you're not going to get rewarded, I've seen this in the college basketball selection committee. Things change year to year, committee to committee. So while you are setting a very dangerous precedent and you look year over year, and if that same precedent comes into play, I do think you'll see teams just start scheduling like Ole Miss did.
Yeah,
honestly, I think you'll see that
now. Like, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, it seems like the committee's only caring about the losses on the loss column. Like, why would you not schedule like that just to get as many wins as you can? I mean, I think that's, if they keep it up in this way, I think that's what you're going to see from coaches and programs, that they're going to schedule very weak in the non-conference.
Yeah, and right now with the criteria that you've seen them talk about week in and week out, it seems like there's 25, 30 data points that they're looking at. And just being somebody that understands data points from doing predicting the college basketball field and relying on what the committee has done in past years, if you have 25 data points, you don't have a single data point. You need to drill down into 8 to 10 data points, make a matrix, and then just see where all the teams fall. That's the only way you can do that rationally. And to your point about conference championships, I'm wondering if the echo chamber just gets too loud where it's just ridiculous. Like all these national media folks are saying how stupid you are. And look, I've seen people that make stupid decisions double down out of stubbornness. And we talked about it on a show a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, or maybe Sunday night. I really can't remember. I've been on so many shows here lately. But if the conference championships have to matter with an unbalanced schedule for each team in the conference. Like it absolutely has to matter. If Penn State goes and gets throttled by Oregon, are they just going to stay at second or third in the country because they lost to a team ahead of them? Like it seems like they're not looking at the entire body of work. They're looking, where do we have teams ranked last week? Okay, well, that's set in stone. And then where do we have them? How do we change it up this week? Oh, well, this team lost, so they have to drop some amount of slots, and we'll just move each team up one. That is idiotic.
Yeah. I mean, for South Carolina to only move up one spot this weekend, that was just or this week was just crazy. I mean, to go on the road to Clemson is not an easy place to play against a really good team that's playing for a conference championship this weekend, and you only move up one spot. After a week, after there's a lot of movement after teams beat and kind of what you call that SoCon Saturday. There's still a lot of movement after that week, so it just doesn't make too much sense. And I kind of thought South Carolina would be ahead of Miami and Ole Miss in the rankings last night. To be honest, going into it, I didn't think South Carolina would be ahead of Alabama. I kind of thought they were going to put Alabama in anyway, but that was one of the biggest things that surprised me was that, Miami and Ole Miss were still ahead of South Carolina, and there is very much a case that they could be ahead of those two teams.
I agree with everything you just said. And one of the other things that I thought about, Alex, is if you have rankings and you have rankings from whatever it is, like week 6 or week 8, whenever they start doing the rankings, you're really pigeonholing yourself because you have to defend those rankings each and every week. But if South Carolina loses by 2 on the road at Alabama and Clemson is ranked ahead of Alabama in last week's poll, and South Carolina goes out and beats Clemson on their field, and you had Clemson ranked ahead of Alabama, and you're really just truly splitting hairs at that point because, okay, this team just beat the team that you said last week was better than Alabama. They lost by 2 to that team. When you look at similar opponents, Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, South Carolina waxed both of them. So you're going to tell me if you just use those 4 data points, okay, lost by 2 over here. Now you go on this side, beat the crap out of 2 teams that Alabama lost to, and just beat the team that was ranked ahead of them in your poll last week. Like this side should mean a heck of a lot more than this side, but it seems like the opposite. It seems like this head-to-head, it matters. And I'm sorry, but like I've said for forever, when you have 12 games of a data set, you don't know what would happen. Like you just don't know. And maybe that's the fool's errand that this selection committee is trying to do. And I even wondered to myself today, Alex, and I haven't texted you about this, what outside of TV and getting eyes on the selection show, what is the benefit of even having rankings that early? You might as well just say, okay, conference championship's over. We've evaluated every single team. Here's how we rank them. Because if you're just going to be lockstep with the AP poll, we don't need you. We don't need you at all. We already have the AP poll. So what are you actually doing?
It's all for TV, I'm pretty sure. I mean, because they know people watch it. So, I mean, and they know that drives ratings up and stuff. So, I mean, I've kind of thought that along the way, too, that, I mean, might as well just wait till closer to the end of the season to start releasing those college football rank or playoff rankings because they don't really, to be honest, mean all that much early on. And kind of as your point, I think it's kind of shown really kind of early what the committee was looking for.
If you started the selection show, release of their rankings in week 10, you cannot convince me that South Carolina would not be ahead of Alabama and Ole Miss and maybe even Miami. If you started in week 10, because do you have 3 losses? Yeah, but guess what? If you start in week 10, Alabama just lost and you have head-to-head wins against teams that they have played. And like the transitive property has to be in effect somewhere in this if you're only going to use 12 games. But that's my, getting on my soapbox. That's me and the frustration that I have in the entire process. And I would be saying the same thing for other teams, and I can make cases for other teams, but this is a Gamecock show. So I'm going to focus on the Gamecocks while we're talking about it. But it is asinine. It is ridiculous. And heads should roll. And the same way I've lost faith in mainstream media on both sides, I have completely lost faith in college football AP voters and the college football selection committee because they're just idiots. All of them.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, the biggest thing you want to look for is just consistency. I mean, we've kind of touched on this throughout this little segment right here, but just be consistent with what you're looking for. Because I think there's been instances, with these rankings that just kind of bounced around each week to what they're really looking for those top 12 teams.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. But, we'll see if they change their mind. We'll see if that echo chamber gets loud enough. I tend to think the echo chamber is going to get very loud, but I've seen stubborn people in my life double down on stubbornness. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think you're going to have Notre Dame and Alabama playing in a game that, college football thinks is going to get massive ratings. And that's just what's going to happen. But you still had a storyline with Notre Dame and South Carolina because they just played in the Gator Bowl a couple of weeks ago. I guess at this point, South Carolina just has to have the storyline, and maybe that starts next year. I've made this point a few times. If you do miss out on the college football playoffs and Oregon does not win the national championship, by my math, I believe you'll have the longest winning streak in the country and you'll have a Heisman frontrunner. And all that seems to matter is to be ranked highly to start the season. And if you have the nation's longest winning streak and one of the best quarterbacks in the country, South Carolina should be ranked in the top 15, if not higher, to start next season. And maybe that's just what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if South Carolina, let's just say, if South Carolina goes to the Citrus Bowl and finds a way to win against Illinois or a team like that, they're going to be really one of the talks of the preseason just because of the way the North Stars has played and what they could potentially build around him, building off of his, the way he's in it this season and what they could add to the team and, defensively, what they have a lot to sell as well. So, kind of as you mentioned, if South Carolina ends this thing, and if they find a way to go and win in whatever bowl they play, they absolutely could be the talk of the offseason and would have a lot of motivation too, as you expect with, feeling like they've been, taking or not having the opportunity to play in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and then like EXO in the chat has a great point, and I'm gonna highlight this. He said early rankings always set you up to win early, and I think that it does set you up in a way to win early too, because if all of a sudden you're one of those teams that the SEC needs to protect, a la LSU this season, maybe you see that happen. Maybe you see that happen more. We all know big brands move the needle in college football, but look, we're going to have so much to talk about over the next couple of weeks, Alex. We can put this one to bed. If the Gamecocks find a way to get in the college football playoff, if the selection committee actually gets off their behind and does a little bit of research and gets their head out of their what, then maybe the Gamecocks find a way in. Outside of that, we're going to be talking a lot about the bowl matchup, and we find that out. I guess it'd be like Sunday or Monday.
Probably Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably find that out Sunday. And then it's going to be portal season. There's going to be a lot to talk about there. So don't worry. We still have a ton of content because college football never stops. But basketball is going to be in full bore on the men's and women's side. Before you know it'll be baseball season. And then it's going to be spring game, and it's going to be what recruits are coming in. And, I know that the first thing Alex is going to do tomorrow is probably type up an article that says, here are the 2026 names to watch. But so, Alex, we're going to move on. We're going to do a quick sponsor break. When we get back, we're going to do a player-by-player breakdown of who the Gamecocks signed on National Signing Day, which, as a reminder, as tough as last night was for Gamecocks, today was a really good day to be a Gamecock when it comes to National Signing Day.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. You know, when I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more. Now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia, yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Welcome back, everybody. We thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just a quick reminder, thebigspur.com never sleeps. I don't think Alex ever sleeps. I know that he was up bright and early this morning, and it seems like he has 10 articles a day. National Signing Day has come to a close, but that just means that portal season is now here. And the Gamecocks are still waiting on one very special wide receiver to make a decision later next month. We'll talk about him at the end of this segment. But, Alex, the Gamecocks signed 25 guys today. And this recruiting class is now ranked 20th overall in the composite rankings. What I'm going to do is just go by bigspur.com. You can go to commitment list. I'm just going to go top to bottom, and we'll talk about each player. Right now, the highest ranked player on the commitment list is wide receiver Malik Clark, 6'2.5", 183 pounds, out of Rock Hill, South Carolina, Rock Hill High School, 4-star kid. Alex, tell us what you know about him and his recruitment.
Yeah, so obviously over the summer, South Carolina had some momentum there, and then Florida State ended up landing his commitment the day of Birdies with Beamer, which I can't remember what day that was, sometime in July, I think. And, South Carolina continued to stay on him, and really, he kind of, I think he showed up to maybe 2 games during the middle of the season and started to feel like things were trending South Carolina's way, especially with the way Florida State season was going. And, Mike Furry and those guys did a great job of, continuing to build that relationship with him and ultimately landed a commitment from him. And he's just really kind of, maybe the highlight of that wide receiver class that's got a few really, really good players in it.
Yeah, with Malik Clark, he's tall, but he's very fast. He has a little bit. I'm trying to think of a good comparison here, Alex. A little bit of Shaq Rowland is what I see with him. If some Gamecock fans remember Shaq Rowland from a number of years ago, kind of that twitchy kind of athlete that's fast, can make plays over the middle, long. Really, I don't know if I would even consider him the crown jewel of the recruiting class, Alex, but a really, really big piece. The next guy, Kendall Daniels Jr., he committed to South Carolina, what seems like over a year ago. I think he might have been around the spring game. 6'3", 190-pound safety out of Norfolk, Virginia, another 4-star guy. Alex, what can you tell us about that recruitment and then how the Gamecocks held his commitment throughout the entire process?
Yeah, South Carolina was kind of at the top, I think, for a little while in this recruitment, and we're just kind of holding off. And, Virginia Tech was really probably the school that was the biggest threat to South Carolina, and Clemson was also in there, kind of trying to get after, land his signature. But South Carolina held everybody off, in the summer, and really he stayed strong in his commitment. And when you look at him, a guy who, 6'3", type of 6'3", 190 guy, that's kind of exactly what they're looking for. Torian Gray's looking for in defensive backs in South Carolina. And, when you think about him coming in, maybe we'll need a year to kind of get under the system, just like most players do in college. But he could be a guy who's got some good upside that can be a really good player for South Carolina.
Yeah, and when it comes to who Torian Gray kind of zeroes in on early in the process and accepts a commitment from, and then you see the 4 stars behind his name to back it up, he's a guy that I have really high hopes for. Lex Cyrus is an interesting one, a 4-star out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 5'10", 170 pounds, another 4-star. This kid can really fly. He is very, very fast. And I know that South Carolina beat Penn State for him in his recruitment. And it's a kid that had a lot of ties to Penn State. There was a lot of reasons he could have gone to Penn State, and Penn State pushed very, very hard even after the commitment for Lex Cyrus. So, Alex, maybe take us back to when he committed and what that day was like, what you were thinking. Was it going to be the Gamecocks? Was it going to be Penn State? And how the Gamecocks held on to him?
Yeah, it was really kind of a battle between those two, and you wondered if just being the home Penn State team would win out with just how close. Obviously, he is closer to Penn State than South Carolina, but that was another one where Mike Furrey, since he's gotten on the job, really built a really solid relationship with Lex Cyrus, and that ultimately was one of the reasons that held out in South. I think Penn State continued to push to try to land, get him to stay home for Penn State, but he had already had those relationships built, and South Carolina ended up landing his signature today. And he's a guy you mentioned, like the first thing you think about with Lex Cyrus is his speed. Like he's a guy who he could be an immediate impact type of guy with that speed this year. And, maybe just continue to get a little bit bigger once he gets to a college weight room, but, another guy who's got some upside that you can see when you watch him on film.
And he's a guy that, despite Penn State and the hometown allure, he was trying to recruit other guys that might be in the 2026 class to come down for him to visit to South Carolina. Yep. I'll tell a quick story, not about Lex Cyrus, but a friend of mine in college. He was a freshman at Penn State, and he came to the University of South Carolina for spring break. He had some friends that went there, and he just never went back to Penn State. He was like, nope, I'm just going to go to school here. I'm going to transfer. He sat out. Well, he didn't sit out, but you know what I mean? He just did stuff online and then filed his paperwork and went to South Carolina. So you can see the allure of those guys from Pennsylvania where the sun doesn't come out for multiple weeks in a row, and why South Carolina and especially Columbia would be appealing. The next guy is Shed Surratt, and for the longest time, he was the only offensive lineman committed in the class. 4-star, 6'4", 300 pounds out of Gaffney, South Carolina. A big old boy. I don't know if he's going to be an offensive tackle long-term or an offensive guard, but Alex, this kind of seemed to be a shutdown recruitment once he made his commitment and just stayed locked in with Lonnie Teasley and the Gamecocks.
Yeah, it was. Over the summer he came in. It was really interesting kind of how it worked out. He had some official visits. I think he went to Colorado and Purdue, I think, before he came to South Carolina, and actually committed to South Carolina before his official visit to South Carolina. I think it was like during the week and then the weekend after he came to South Carolina for his official visit. And I think it really kind of came down, Colorado was probably South Carolina's biggest threat for a little while there. But I think, just proximity and a guy, another relationships guy. We've seen how Lonnie Teasley's recruited here so far, especially with the in-state guys that he's added in so far. And a guy who, you listed as offensive tackle, maybe if, seeing how things work out, maybe could slide inside, but, I can definitely see it at offensive tackle with his size, and a really good player from Gaffney High School. That's another one that South Carolina's added.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to show this comment on here. This is Jay Diz. This is the next guy we're going to talk about. Brian Rowe, 4-star, another 4-star from Concord, North Carolina, 5'10", 151 pounds. I don't believe that he's 5'10", and I don't believe he's 151 pounds. I think that maybe they need to get that updated. I saw him in the 7-on-7 with you, Alex, over the summer. I feel like he's every bit of 6 foot. I'm 6'3". I stood next to him. He is tiny though, but I think he weighs a little bit more than 151 pounds. A guy that's an amazing athlete, a great basketball player, and a kid that can really elevate and go up and high point the football, and also electric with the ball in his hands. Another guy, Alex, that I would compare to Malik Clark and Shaq Rowland. Same kind of athleticism, just gotta put it all together when he gets to college. But what's your take on Brian Rowe? And he's another guy that committed early. We talked to him over the summer, and he never wavered.
Yeah, so South Carolina has him listed as 5'11", 170 right now.
Yeah,
So I
that
think
seems
that's
a little more
probably
realistic.
yeah, and he still does need to continue to get bigger. Because as you mentioned when we saw him in the summer, you could tell he was continuing to put on the weight, but still need to get bigger. I think that's going to be the case for him, and just for pretty much everybody in this, in any high school recruit. But you mentioned it, his athleticism when we watched him in those 7-on-7s really stood out. A guy who can really go up and get it. And you can kind of see those basketball skills, come out with. Obviously he's a really good basketball player, and you can see him really go and high point the ball. And he's just a guy who seems like he's, continuing to get better in the route running and that aspect, but a guy who, you can see it too when you watch him both on 7-on-7 and in his film. He's a guy who can also make you miss. So he's got a chance to be one of those like really exciting playmakers for South Carolina in this wide receivers class. Just basically, I feel like we're going to say that about each of their wide receivers that they have signed, but it's the truth. Like these guys it's a really, really good wide receiver class.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this about Brian as well. I've only talked to a handful of these kids. Alex has probably talked to more of them, but just a really yes sir, no sir, really humble person that understands how good he is at football, but still remains humble and a very, very nice kid, and exactly the kind of kid you want in the locker room. So the next one we're going to talk about is Xavion Hardy. This was the first flip of the day. The Gamecocks were able to get Xavion Hardy signed and committed to South Carolina. The number one JUCO recruit in the country, 4-star defensive tackle, 6'6", 280, out of East Mississippi Community College. A guy that was committed to South Carolina out of high school, didn't make the grades qualifying, never signed with South Carolina, and was enamored with Mississippi State for a little bit. And I think ultimately it was one of those things that Shane Beamer mentioned in his press conference today, that did he really fit in Starkville, Mississippi? Wouldn't it be better to be in Columbia, a little closer to home? So, Alex, talk to us about Xavion Hardy, how the flip happened, what you can share.
Yeah, so if you follow recruiting, you probably remember him from previous cycles when they had, when he looked like he was going to come to South Carolina, but ended up going the junior college route. And East Mississippi Community College, if you watch Last Chance U, you're obviously familiar with that program, and they put out really good players every year. And he's a guy who's ranked right now as the number one junior college player in the country, and was a really big flip, for a lot of reasons, just because of how good of a player he is, but the needs of that kind of interior defensive line part, or defensive tackle for South Carolina, with who they could be losing this year with TJ Sanders and Tonka and Boogie Huntley. More those two of them are definitely departing. And TJ Sanders, probably a good chance he does with where he is in the NFL draft boards right now. But a guy in Xavion Hardy, 6'5", but when you watch him, he's really athletic. He's a guy who you really kind of see his speed at that level, or at the junior college level. So when he comes in, it's going to be a little bit of a transition, just like with the high school kids or recruits of coming in to getting ready for that SEC ball. But he's a guy who South Carolina's probably going to bring in from the portal, and the numbers are going to bring in the portal. He's going to be another one of these older guys who have played at a college level before that can bring that experience to the table.
Yeah, and Shane Beamer kind of compared him today to Zach Pickens, and he said, kind of a bigger guy, athletic guy, strong guy, and obviously Zach Pickens was a very high NFL draft pick. But yeah, South Carolina definitely has a need for defensive tackle. Alex, on the commitment list, I'm actually going to scroll down to the last flip of the day, the last 4-star on 24/7 Sports. Damala Aja Dahun. I don't know if me or Todd Ellis is worse at pronouncing names, but 4-star offensive tackle, was previously committed to Georgia Tech. Gamecocks hosted him a couple times this year for an official visit as well. 6'6", 280, 4-star offensive tackle. Georgia Tech's making their hay right now when it comes to recruiting and what they're able to offer players financially. They flipped a top 100 kid from Clemson just last week. But talk about that. And was that flip something that you were expecting coming into National Signing Day, or was it kind of behind the scenes type stuff?
It was a little bit of a surprise. I wondered if he was going to end up, it seemed like there was a lot of momentum for South Carolina when he was making those visits, and it wasn't like it was just a 1-game visit. He was in for 2, maybe 3 games to South Carolina. And, you always say kind of follow the visits with those recruits, and that's what you kind of were. But then kind of seemed like maybe he went back for that NC State game, for the Georgia Tech NC State game. And I think, it kind of felt like maybe he was going to end up sticking. But Lonnie Teasley got it done here again, and he's a really good player too. Obviously, we can look at his rankings and see that a 4-star guy. And Brent Key, Georgia Tech's head coach, when he's an offensive line guy, and he knows what to look for in offensive linemen, and they've got a really good class of offensive linemen over there. And Demola was one of those top guys, and for him, when you watch him, you can see why Brent Key liked him. Just a big physical guy on the offensive line, and another really good get for the Gamecocks there, and another good flip.
Yeah, and so as we move on past the guys that were 4 stars on 24/7 Sports, Caleb Williams is another defensive tackle, 6'5", 250 pounds. I think he's gonna play defensive tackle. Alex, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he's gonna be a defensive tackle. He's from Chesterfield, Virginia, 3-star on 24/7 Sports, but other outlets have him as a 4-star player. Another kid from Virginia, another kid that you need help with defensive tackle, and I don't know if he's going to be a contributor from day one, but you keep building that depth, and you can always supplement from the portal. But along the lines, if you can get these kids out of high school, that's where you want to get them. So Caleb Williams, I know he flirted with Georgia for a little bit, flirted with some other schools after his commitment, or at least social media said he did, and recruiting websites said he did. But everything I heard the entire time was he was locked on South Carolina, and he even made public statements that he was locked in on South Carolina. Alex, was there ever anything to worry about with Caleb Williams?
No, not really. He, I think when you think about it, kind of same with Kendall Daniels, both being Virginia guys, you wondered if Virginia Tech was going to get back in there and try to talk him into staying in state, but that didn't happen. I was actually, looking to see at, what South kind of had him listed at size-wise. I'm trying to sit here and find it real quick, but at 24/7, we have him listed at 6'5.5", 250, and it looks like they have Caleb Williams listed at, if I can find it. No, I can't find it. I'll keep looking.
It's okay.
Oh, here they have him listed right now at 6'6", 275. So I mean that's a pretty big jump from where we have him listed in 24/7. And when you think about, and not to skip ahead here, but when you think about these defensive linemen, Carolina's at it. We talked about how big Xavier Hardy is and how athletic he is. Caleb Williams 6'6". Then South Carolina gets Christian Ingram. And he's another guy who I think is like 6'5", maybe. I think we have him listed at 6'5", and it's just a group that it's going to look like SEC defensive linemen coming in, and South Carolina has a really good SEC defensive line now, and you can see some of the athleticism kind of traits that are kind of similar between the two groups that we're comparing here. But I think it's a really good defensive line haul, and as we mentioned, a group that they need to continue to replenish, and they did through the high school ranks, but now when they do it through the portal ranks, which are coming up soon, they got a chance for Travian Robertson and that group to have a good haul.
I think absolutely. And like I said, it's a guy that on other sites is ranked as a 4-star. Another guy like that who's ranked on a 4-star on some other platforms is Jaquavius Dodd. He's a 6'5", 225-pound defensive end from Taylor, South Carolina, Eastside High School. He's a guy, if you just look at his profile picture and you just look face up, you think he might be a little bit of a doughboy, and you might wonder if he might be a defensive tackle. But when you see his entire body in a picture, or you see him in person, he has the body type to be a very good defensive end. And he's a guy that I think is South Carolina can just mold, honestly.
Yes. Yeah. You took the words out of my mouth. When you look at him, he looks like one of those prototypical edge players that South kind of goes after, that Sterling Lucas really likes. And, just kind of going off what South kind of released their size, or they released the heights and weights. And, South kind of lists him at 6'6", 240 right now. So that's really good for a high school edge. And he's going to need to continue to progress. And he's really good at high school level, but just with all these players continue to progress. And I think he's a guy who has a really high ceiling at South Carolina. Maybe not year one. Maybe he continues to learn on some of the older players in year one, and maybe he could make an impact in year one. But when you see the potential of this player, he's got a chance to be really, really good.
And the same thing with Donovan Darden. He's I believe he's a 3-star on all sites, but he's from Havelock, North Carolina. If you know anything about Havelock, North Carolina, you know that this is defensive line heaven. This is a guy that came on an official visit when we were at the 7-on-7 camp, Alex, and you had to pop out for a little bit. And I was like, who the crap is this guy?
Yeah.
Like, this guy is built like a an SEC player right away. And, you're talking about 6'4", 225 pounds. No idea what they list him at, but I can tell you that he has the frame to easily carry 260, 265 and be just a menace. So remember, being a 3-star player doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad player. That means you're an above average player. And with the way that South Carolina has been able to mold and grow these kids, Donovan Darden, I think that came down to NC State and South Carolina, Alex. I'm trying to remember on Donovan.
Yeah, NC State and Illinois were really kind of the top three go for him.
So he's a guy that committed back in the summer. I think he's going to be a really good get for South Carolina. And that takes us right down to the second flip of the day from a SEC school. Mike Tyler, 6'3", 225-pound tight end from the Hammond School in Columbia, South Carolina. And he was committed to LSU for a long time. 3-star guy, 89 rating. I think that if you put him on a public high school, I think he'd be ranked a little bit higher because his athleticism does translate. Yeah. But I think the private school probably dinged him a little bit. I don't necessarily know if he's a guy that's going to be ready to contribute day one, but he is exactly how you draw up a tight end if you're taking an incoming freshman.
Yeah, you nailed it there. It looks like a guy who could develop into another one of these really good South Carolina tight ends that they've produced, and really interesting recruitment with him. Early on, it kind of seemed like South Carolina had the momentum. Then it kind of maybe slipped a little, not slipped, but things like maybe both sides kind of cooled a little bit, and he ended up coming to LSU, and South Carolina wasn't in his top three. I think I can't remember who. West Virginia, I know, was in there. I can't remember who the other school was. Maybe Duke that was in there, but then South Carolina had Preston Douglas committed, but Preston Douglas ended up, it was a parting of ways really, and then they really they had turned it up on Mike Tyler at that point, and went all in on him, and he was at multiple games this year at Williams-Brice, and really I think this one's kind of been done for a little while. He had I think it's been one where he's been known for a little while where he wanted to go and made it official today.
Yeah, I think Mike Tyler even said today in his presser or whatever, his signing day press conference, that he made his decision during or right after the Missouri game.
Yeah.
So this is one that's been done for a little bit for South Carolina. Maybe not, but the coaches might not even have known. But he was one of the recent welcome homes as well that Shane Beamer sent out. Jordan Gidron is a 6'2", 185-pound wide receiver from Columbia, South Carolina at Ridgeview. He's a 3-star, but he was a top 100 kid in the country when he was in the 2026 class. He has reclassified to 2025, and Shane Beamer said in his press conference today that he was the guy that the coaching staff was all over for 2026. And then when they found out, hey, we might be able to get this guy on the roster in 2 months, it became an all-out blitz of like, no, we have to get this guy. So don't let that 3-star rating by Jordan Gidron fool you. He is a really, really good player that had offers from everybody in the country. And it was a situation where he reclassified when a lot of other schools were full, and he knew where he wanted to go, and it was South Carolina.
Yeah, we talked about the speed with Lex Cyrus, and this is one too where Lex Cyrus is 5'10", right? But Jordan Gidron's a guy who we haven't listed at 6'2" right now. See what South Carolina has him listed at. They have him listed at I can't find it right now, but they got him. He's a guy who is going to be in that 6'2" range, and he's a guy who's track guy too, is really, really fast. And I think the composite rankings right now have him as a 4-star. And I think that's about where he should be. He's another really good player, and you have to see what's that first year look like with him. Reclassifying, what's that first year at South Carolina going to look like? But it's another guy who you can see the upside from the film, and he's a really good take for South Carolina, a really good get.
Yeah, the next one's another guy that we has been committed to South Carolina for a long time. Anthony Addison from Sumter, South Carolina, 6'3", 210-pound edge, a 3-star guy. But I can just tell you they grow him different in Sumter. From playing sports against Sumter my entire high school career, he's one of those guys that I think is probably headed for a red shirt his freshman year. But development is the name of the game with that kid, and just molding him. And the way I've talked about molding other kids, but he had some really good numbers for Sumter this football season, and a guy that I think can be a contributor down the road, if not sooner. What do you say, Alex?
I 100% agree. I think, you kind of stand right where you are on him. And guy who, when you watch him, got a really good motor, and he's like always going. And that's really what Stern Lucas and those guys look for at edge. And, a guy who right now is 6'3", but, I think that's kind of what, in that range of what they're looking for. And, he's a guy who absolutely could develop into another one, a really good player. And I feel like I'm saying that with all these guys, but they really kind of, in this class, they have a lot of guys who can, play in year one and make an impact. But there's a lot of guys you can see in this class who, after a year or so, they could really take off. And Anthony Addison's absolutely one of those guys.
The next guy is too, Jaquel Holman, an athlete from Blacksville, South Carolina, Blacksville Hilda High School, 6'1", 193, 3-star 88. I'm sorry, this kid's a 4-star all day, every day. He's the kind of guy that can play offense or defense. I spoke to one of his coaches over the summer, and they had not figured out where the coaches wanted him to play yet. They just knew they wanted him. And he's a guy that was actually listed as an athlete today when South Carolina announced their signing class. I'm just here to tell you that this guy could be a running back. He could be a wide receiver. He could be a linebacker. He could be a safety. He's truly one of the better players that I saw on 7-on-7 and one of the most impressive guys that I saw. I would say he was one of the top 3, 4, 5 impressive guys. And really, when you get to that level of splitting hairs between 1 through 5, he could be anywhere in that range. This is a guy that Gamecock fans should be excited for. And Alex, I think he's going to play running back.
I mean, I could definitely see it. There's definitely a case for it. When you look at him, he looks like he could be physically ready to do that. Obviously, continue to put on weight, but if he's going to play running back, he looks like he could absolutely do it. And he could really, it feels like he could play any position on the field pretty much with his athleticism and his size. Like, you're right. When we saw him, you're just like, wow, like, hey, that guy's really good. And, I think it was really interesting this morning when they announced his signing and listed him as an athlete. The thought was maybe linebacker, maybe kind of that hybrid safety type, but they did list him as an athlete. So maybe they'll kind of figure out early on where they really like him. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised anywhere that they play him. He could do it at a high level.
Oh, he's absolutely a hidden gem in this class.
Yeah.
And I do not understand why South Carolina didn't have to fight for him. Like, I really don't understand that one. And sometimes there's some guys like that in that class. Alex, was there any real competition for Quell Holman?
I was just about to say it was pretty much NC State, I think. And that was about it. That they really and South Carolina had his commitment for a while, and South Carolina was where he was going to go, but I think NC State was really the biggest and about only threat.
One of the guys that committed today, and I know we're going a little bit long, but I want to give all these guys their due because this is one of the biggest days in their life, and Gamecock fans need to know about them. Christian Ingram is a 6'6", 290-pound defensive tackle out of Covington, Georgia, 3-star 88. This is a guy that I think if he picked up his offers that he got later in the process would have been a 4-star guaranteed.
Yeah, I think he is a 4-star at that. I mean, you can, he's just kind of like a late riser. You don't see it too much anymore at that, but he's the guy who's really kind of taken off here in his senior year at high school. And, you can just look at his offer list and tell that he's a top-notch player. And you watch the film and see that too. I mean, he's got offers from Southern Cal, Georgia, Michigan, Kentucky. And when you think about Kentucky, like, Mark Stoops knows what he's looking for in defensive lineman. That's a program that churns out defensive linemen, better than just about everybody. And, so that he's a guy who they had a really, I think Southern Cal, it came down to Southern Cal. He took an official visit there this past weekend or either 2 weekends ago, but, they had to fend off Southern Cal, but, Travian Robertson built that relationship, and he was at a few games this year. And I think that's eventually what won out, and also sticking close to home from, staying fairly close to South Carolina or going out all the way to Los Angeles, and that staying home and the relationships won out.
Absolutely. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to Jennifer and Brian Harrison. Hello, y'all. We always appreciate you joining us, and make sure you go back and you watch the beginning of the show as well. But I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Alex. It's
Kobe Saki,
or say it again slowly.
Kobe Saki Pra. I believe I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm not.
So he's a guy that committed pretty earlier. This is another guy that had bonkers numbers in high school this year. He's another defensive end, 6'3", 225 from Roswell, Georgia, Roswell High School. He's a guy that you just take purely on his numbers and you figure it out once he gets here. I think he could be, I don't know what South Carolina listed him as on their announcement today.
Yeah,
but I think he could be a bigger linebacker. I think he could be a defensive end. I don't necessarily think he's going to grow into a defensive tackle, but at the end of the day, like this guy just puts up numbers and you find a way to get him in your class and you see what happens.
So South Carolina right now has him listed 6'6", 230. So
yeah, so
I mean, he's obviously grown, and like, you know, he could be a guy who, when you think about what South Carolina is going to do at that edge spot, we've talked about who they have. You know, the guys they have coming back. You think about Dylan Stewart and Brian Thomason. I mean, they're going to bring some guys in from that transfer portal, and he could be a guy who really benefits from that redshirt year potentially. Like, you know, if he comes in and makes an impact, that's great for South Carolina. But a guy like him at that 6'6", I mean, we have him listed at 6'3", for him to be listed at 6'6" right now. Like, I mean, he's continuing to grow and get bigger. And like, we keep talking about this edge group with Dodd and Addison, like they just look like, and we talk about the interior guys too, they just already look like SEC defensive linemen. And that's what they're looking for. And he's a guy who, you know, you talk about the numbers. He's a guy who's very productive in high school. And I mean, I think South Carolina really probably beat out Mississippi State for him. And there's a few other schools. I think Mississippi State was probably the biggest threat there. And I mean, God, it's, you know, he's another one of these 3-stars who you could easily make a case for him to be a 4-star. And if he's really, I mean, 6'6", that's pretty incredible. I hadn't realized that until just now.
If he's 6'6", 230, doing what he's doing on his highlights, then yeah, that's a diamond in the rough. The next guy is the quarterback in the class. It's Cutter Woods. 6'2", 6'3", 210, 215 pounds from Anderson, South Carolina, Westside High School. Gamecocks flipped him from Wake Forest over the summer. It didn't really take long once he got the offer from South Carolina to make that flip. I do know for 100% fact that Clemson kicked the tires on Cutter Woods, and Cutter Woods said that he was happy at South Carolina despite having some family ties to Clemson. He's a guy that, Alex, and we were at the 7-on-7 and Westside was there. There were 2 to 3 Gamecock coaches locked in on him every opportunity they had. He put on a show. And I'll just be very, very frank with you. He was very accurate downfield. He was accurate to intermediate. He put zip on the ball when he needed to, put air into the ball when he needed to do that as well. There were very few incompletions that I saw. And look, 7-on-7 is a lot different than when you have the type of defensive ends that we're talking about and defensive tackles chasing after your butt. But when it comes to just being a thrower of the football, he reminds me a lot of Blake Mitchell. That was my comparison for him. And I think he is the perfect quarterback to take in this class. I like him a lot.
Yeah, I mean, not much more I can say off of that. I was really impressed from what I saw from him, not only as a junior, but what we saw from him in camp too. I mean, he was making all the throws, and you mentioned Dow Loggins, Shane Beamer, and Mike Shula. All those guys are right there watching him pretty much every game that we were there watching. So, I mean, he's a guy too. Shane Beamer mentioned this today. He's a winner. I mean, a guy who's won state championship at Westside and seems like he's got a good chance to do it again this year with how they're playing. So, guy that's a winner and another really good take for South Carolina.
And I'll kind of like go behind the curtain here, Alex, because a lot of folks don't have the opportunity to go to 7-on-7s unless you have a kid that's playing there. You're covering it like we were. Yeah. But the coaches are usually pretty stoic when they're watching 7-on-7. They don't show a lot of emotion. They're just watching kids play ball. They're watching kids have fun. You'll see coaches talking to like the big time guys like on the side when they have an opportunity, just building that relationship. But there were numerous times, Alex, that you and I were standing beside each other and Cutter Woods would make a throw and Dow Loggins would just throw his hands up in the air in disbelief and just like trot back to Mike Shula and shaking his head like, what the heck just happened? And, it was so like, I'm just telling you guys, I'm not saying he's going to be a Heisman Trophy winner, but I'm saying when it comes to 7-on-7 and putting the ball where it needs to be and making all the throws, he did it.
It didn't take them long after that 7-on-7 to offer him either. They obviously were thinking about it before that, but after that, I think it was like that next week, maybe they offered him. It didn't take long at all.
Well, Alex, you and I walked into that. We're like, yeah, we want to get our eyes on Cutter, just see what he looks like. Mm-hmm. And we after the first or second 7-on-7 game, both of us were just like looking at each other like, what the heck?
Yeah.
This guy's pretty good. And I was telling you, I was like, dude, he's going to get an offer. He's going to get an offer. And you're like, I don't know. I mean, they were still chasing some other guys at that point. Like the quarterback board hadn't really formulated. And then like two games later, you came up to me. It's like, I think he's getting an offer, Matt. Like, look at all these coaches hanging around him. I think he's going to get an offer.
Yeah. Yeah, that the quarterback board shake pretty quickly.
Yeah, it actually did. The next guy on the list is Josh Smith from Irmo, South Carolina, Dutch Fork High School. A little bit of a later commitment. It was probably about a month and a half ago, give or take. He's listed at 6'2", 230, 3-star on 24/7. This is a guy that I know that Hale has beat the table for to be a 4-star. So that's just another guy that, committed to LSU, might be a 4-star.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, when you think about it with him and his recruitment, it was really, you thought about Ole Miss potentially coming, they'd offered, and, they're another school that knows what they're looking for and kind of that edge, kind of like, they list him as linebacker. So, I mean, he's a guy who plays at a really good program at Dutch Fork, and, has got another one of these guys has a chance to develop at South Carolina. And, maybe not that first year he's making an impact, but he could be one down the road you're seeing making a big impact.
Yeah, and then South Carolina is growing that linebacker core out right now, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
The next guy we're going to talk about is DeMarcus Leach, 6'2", 180-pound safety out of Abbeville, South Carolina, Abbeville High School. And I just said that Hale was pounding the table for Josh Smith. I don't know if there's another guy we'll talk about here in a little bit that Hale likes a lot, but DeMarcus Leach is one of them.
Yes, and you can see why, too. It's just kind of that 6'2", 180 build. We talk about what Torian Gray and Shane Beamer wanted DB, and he looks just like it. I mean, he's another guy who, can continue to develop in his high school and does it all for Abbeville. And I think it's just, Hale, as you mentioned, has been all over, thinking, how praising him for how good he really is. And he could really be a guy who you see come in on special teams in that year one and make an impact. We're seeing that right now with Fred Johnson and David Busey, who in their respective positions right now could be, making an impact next year. But I could definitely see a guy like DeMarcus Leach, and another one that we're going to be mentioning here soon that I think you're hinting at. That could be making a special teams impact.
And really quick, Exo, I see you in the chat. When you say, how did Clemson not offer Cutter Woods? There was an offer extended privately, but not publicly because of optics and how that might look. But Clemson definitely kicked the tires and would have taken Cutter Woods if he was receptive. The next guy on here has a last name that is familiar with a lot of Gamecock fans. It is the younger brother of Gamecock superstar quarterback Lenore Sellers. Wide receiver Jaden Sellers from my alma mater, South Florence High School. 3-star, 5'11", 165 pounds. This is one of the cases where I think that his measurements might be pretty accurate. That's 5'11", 165. But I can tell you this. I talked to a rival high school coach that faced off against Jaden Sellers, every year for the last 3-4 years. And the first words that came out of his mouth when I asked, like, what's your thoughts on Jaden Sellers? He said, fast as expletive word. He was like, he is fast as an expletive. He was like, I really hope that he's not healthy when we play them coming off the ACL tear. At South Florence, you got to remember, they don't play a fun and gun offense. It's very run oriented. He played a lot at quarterback towards the end of the season and a lot last year too in the Wildcat. He is a quick, twitchy guy, very, very fast. I've seen his speed confirmed in the 4.3, 4.4 range, and he's just getting back to full health after tearing his ACL last season. He will be playing this weekend in the lower state championship to go to the state championship for South Florence. So he's another kid that's a winner. One quick story that I'll share with you is I talked to the South Florence head coach a number of years ago, and it's when right after Lenore Sellers committed to South Carolina, he came and spoke at an event that I was at, and he was talking about Lenore's, and he actually mentioned Jaden as well. And he said when Jaden was a freshman and Lenore's was the quarterback at South Florence, that Lenore's threw such a tight spiral and threw the crap out of the ball at the high school level that he had never seen anything like it. He was like, I knew immediately this guy was a stud. But he said Jaden Sellers was the only player on the team that could actually catch a pass from Lenore Sellers. And that was as a freshman. And obviously they've probably thrown the ball in the backyard a number of times. So he probably knows like what Lenore's is capable of. But I'm just saying, do not underestimate Jaden Sellers. Do not say that he was the throw-in to get Lenore's, because that's not the case. This is a guy that if he was healthy all year last year and all year this year and was in if he was in Cutter Wood's offense, he'd be putting up numbers that you wouldn't believe. So just remember the name Jaden Sellers. Alex, this was kind of a cut and dry recruitment. He got offered before Lenoris even committed to South Carolina.
Yeah.
Jaden was offered and he committed. So he's been a long time Gamecock, and so is Lenoris. And I know that both of them are excited to play together next year. I don't know if you want to add anything to Jaden. I just know I know South Florence better.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, guy who's first in the class, I think October 2023, I believe, is when he committed. And obviously, with being Loris's brother, you kind of felt South Carolina was in the driver's seat. And I mean, just first thing you mentioned the first thing you see when you watch him is just the speed. And we keep talking about that with this wide receiver class. Like, this class is really good, but the speed of this wide receivers class is something that's, when you see these guys first take the field, that's definitely going to jump out to you. And Jaden Sellers is right at the top of that.
Oh, absolutely. The next guy we're going to talk about is Tayshawn Alston, another defensive end, 6'3", 234. I think he might be able to play linebacker as well, Alex.
Linebacker, yeah.
I think that's the plan for him. A 3-star out of Henderson, North Carolina, Vance County High School. He's a guy as well that when he gets off the bus, he looks like a linebacker. He looks like a guy that can play. Probably going to take a red shirt, but I wouldn't put anything past him. But I think he is accurately rated as a 3-star at this point in time.
Yeah, he and we haven't talked about him yet, but he and AJ Holloway are kind of similar builds for that linebacker spot. You can see him maybe playing that inside linebacker spot and really just being a force there, being in those run stopping areas. And I think he's also got more so maybe than Holloway a little bit. He could maybe play more of that outside linebacker spot because he did play a little bit of edge in high school at Vance County, and guy that really I think North Carolina and Rutgers were the two that you watched for with him in the recruitment, but South Carolina kind of won him over, I think, on the official visit. But a guy who has all the potential to, we'll see how he does in that first year. But he's got the frame and he's ready to go.
And we'll take AJ Holloway next, and we'll come back to the other guy. But AJ Holloway is a thumper. He's projected to be a middle linebacker type, kind of like what Alex just said. Already 6'2", 225. He might be a little bit bigger than that. He's going to put on weight. He's going to be he has the opportunity to be a really good player at South Carolina. And I'll just say that there's not a single, and this isn't just being a South Carolina media person or a South Carolina homer, but I just don't think the state of South Carolina, North Carolina gets the recruiting analysis that other states do. So I think that like when you see these guys getting taken early by South Carolina, just keep an eye on them. They're all not going to pan out. There's going to be 5-stars in classes that don't pan out, but keep an eye on these guys. AJ Holloway is a guy that I think has a bright future. Maybe not right away, but he is a thumper. He will hit you. And when you're looking for football players, and especially linebackers, that's what you're looking for. Really quick, Alex, we're going to talk about Max Kelly and Kyle Farrow. I'll be honest, I don't know jack crap about either of them.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Max Kelly, a guy who I think 24/7 has rated him number 1. I'm not sure what Cole's Kicking, which is like the main kind of high school kicking site, have. I can't remember what they have him listed as. I know he's up there though, but South Carolina's special teams and a Beamer Ball, they put the emphasis on special teams, and losing Hunter Rogers this year, going to need a long snapper, and they have others on the roster, but they're going to offer these guys scholarships just because of the importance that they have in Shane Beamer's system, and these two guys. Max Kelly, you got kind of Mason Love maybe right there in the program to kind of compete with, but Max Kelly's a guy who's shown that he's got a really good leg on him. It's going to, at the very least, he could find his way onto the field, but he's going to provide competition in that room.
Well, the one thing I can tell you about taking a long snapper on scholarship, Rick Stockstill, who was a Gamecock coach for a long time, went to Middle Tennessee State to be the head coach. There was a kid at my high school, South Florence, named Adam Wade, the number 1 long snapper in the country. And he got offered preferred walk-ons at Clemson, Georgia, South Carolina, all these different places, and said, well, we'll find ways to get you the scholarship money. We'll make sure you don't pay tuition. Well, Rick Stockstill understood the value of a long snapper, and Adam was a 4-year starter at Middle Tennessee State, never threw a ball over the punter's head, never threw a ball like where the place kicker couldn't get it from the holder. And it was worth his weight in gold. I mean, he's still like he was a long snapper because he realized he was 5'10" or 5'6" and 230 pounds, and he might still have the all-time tackle record at South Florence, but he knew he had to refine his craft because he wasn't going to be able to be a linebacker in college at that size. And, you find the right long snapper and the right kicker, and those are game-changing things. And like to Alex's point, that's why you take these guys and give them a scholarship, because one boggled snap, one missed kick. I mean, we saw the Alabama game this year. All respect to Alex Herrera, but that was a tough situation to kick in. So, and you go get a guy that might be on scholarship and see what happens and develop him. But so don't turn your nose up to kickers and long snappers getting scholarships. The last guy we're going to talk about, I think, might be Hale's favorite recruit in the class that's not a 4-star. And Alex, I know you and Hale have talked about Christopher Hatfield a lot.
Yeah.
6'3", 205-pound cornerback out of Long County High School in Lincolntown, Georgia. Everyone that I talked to said this guy is going to be like a Coach Simpson type player, like a 2-3-star that comes out of nowhere. But this guy plays all over the field for his high school. And I don't want to say Stephon Gilmore because that's just really, really high praise.
Yeah.
But this is a guy that he is not a 3-star. He is not an 87. No way around that one. So, Alex, I'll let you talk about him.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with everybody else that this guy may be one of the more underrated recruits in this class right now, and maybe you can put him up there as the most underrated recruit in this class. I mean, as you were sitting there talking, I had his huddle up, watching this huddle, and it's just like this guy can play. Like, I mean, you look at the size. Like we've talked about those other safeties and corners that are DBs that South Carolina has offered 6'3" right now and playing that corner spot, and you watch them on film. Sometimes with corners, you wonder, are they not a fan of contact? Not this guy. I mean, this guy will come up and hit you and look like, I kind of like what I saw.
6'3", 205. 6'3", 205 playing corner. Wow.
And it just feels like he has a chance to be one of these guys who, maybe in that first year he's a big special teams guy, because I think he could be. He could maybe be like a David Busey type on special teams because, kind of not to go off, but watching David Busey, like that guy will come up and he'll hit you.
I'm a big fan of David Busey.
Yeah, like it's fun to watch him on special teams, and I can't wait to see what he can do at safety. But I mean, back to Chris Hatfield, I kind of feel like he can be in that role in year one at South Carolina, but he kind of feels like could be that guy who year two you see him get better and get on the field. Year three you see him really start to emerge, and maybe it's before year three, maybe it's before year two. Torian Gray has this guy ready to go and can turn into maybe that Darius Rush type who didn't play early on as a freshman or didn't do much as early on in his career from a defensive side, but really turns it on and becomes a draft pick at some point. Like, I mean, this guy's got a lot of potential, and I don't think he's a 3-star. I think he's a 4-star at that.
Yeah, and I would say if he doesn't make the field year one, year two, it's because the Gamecocks have recruited so well in the secondary and they've developed players so well. Yeah. If there's one position group on the team that outside of quarterback, you're not worried about, like really, really worried about, it's secondary. I think that the Gamecocks have just locked and loaded and got the right guys in the program and developed them. And South Carolina, for some of you old timers, used to be called DBU. They are really trying to recreate that now at South Carolina. And my hat off to Torian Gray. He is a ridiculous evaluator. He's a quiet assassin on the recruiting trail, but he is a heck of a developer. So that's the recruiting class. Alex, I'm not going to keep you much longer here, but there is a big name that we haven't talked about yet. That is another reclassification, wide receiver from Irmo, Donovan Murph. I believe he's going to commit at the All-American game on January 2nd. As far as we know, he has not sent an NIL into any school, as far as we know. But maybe he did, and it's been really kept on the hush-hush. But those kind of things seem to get out more often than not. But Alex, I think that he's a guy that's not going to be scared off about this wide receiver commitment list that South Carolina has. He really is what I would consider an alpha, a guy that's not scared of competition, believes in himself, not cocky, but confident is the best way I would explain him, and his game matches it. If the Gamecocks are able to pull Donovan Murphy in this class, would you say that South Carolina has this? You might already say this, but adding the cherry on the top in Donovan Murphy, it would be the best wide receiver class in South Carolina recruiting history.
It'd definitely be up there. I mean, not just the numbers too, but just the kind of star power that they have with the potential. And Donovan Murphy, like he's definitely up there in the top of the recruiting class from where he could be. Like if he comparing to other wide receivers, he'd be up there at the top. And he's just, I know you and I both saw him at 7-on-7, and he's a guy who, I mean, just flashed constantly. And real quick, going back to Hatfield, I just want to correct myself. Like they're going to look at him. It seems like maybe a free safety kind of early on in the career, but he plays cornerback in high school. But we'll get a little bit of a look at free safety. But who knows? He may end up back at that corner spot. But just kind of clarifying that just to make sure we had it right. But yeah, back to Donovan Murphy. Like I mean, he's a guy who just has all the talent in the world. And I think right now you think South Carolina and Clemson are the two that are really going after it. Now I still like where South Carolina stands. He was at Clemson for the Citadel game and then for the Carolina Clemson game as well. So that one's I think he's committing January 2nd, I do believe, at the Under Armour game. And it'll be interesting to see. I think I like where South Carolina stands still right now.
Yeah, and I would say as well, there's going to be twists and turns. There's going to be all kinds of articles that come out about him because he is the number one recruit left on the board for South Carolina, Clemson, Tennessee. I don't think he's going to end up at NC State, where he posted a picture from today. I think he'll be one of those three schools. I echo Alex's sentiment that, there's a lot of reasons for optimism when it comes to the Gamecocks and Donovan Murphy, but nothing is ever done until it's signed, sealed, and delivered. But he is a kid that's going to be, he's going to need to enroll somewhere pretty soon because he's an early enrollee. And I don't know if he's going to be, be able to partake in spring practice like Jordan Gidron is. I'm not sure about that, but Tennessee, South Carolina, and Clemson, there is one priority left in the 2025 class, and they are all chasing the same guy. So just there might be twists and turns. But Alex, before we get out of here, really, we're not going to talk about guys that decommitted from South Carolina. I guess we can, but like any misses, like close calls where the Gamecocks might have finished second. Jared Smith comes to mind. I do think the Gamecocks finished second. I think that the Gamecocks gave him a lot to think about. That's a 5-star defensive end that committed to Auburn. Lagonza Hayward. He was a welcome home to South Carolina. Never actually verbally, publicly stated it. I think he's committed to like 5 different schools in the process. Anybody else out there? Kevin Wynn, I guess. Kevin Wynn was up there.
Yeah, the main two would be probably Jared Smith and Kevin Wynn were the two that we were tracking kind of coming in today. And, South Carolina did give Jared Smith a lot to think about, but, being a guy from Alabaster, Alabama, in-state with Auburn, it was going to be a tough pool because Auburn's recruited really well this cycle, and especially in-state. It was going to be a tough pool. Sterling Lucas and those guys gave it all they had, but, Auburn won out in that one. Then Kevin Wynn ends up sticking with Florida State, and, I think South Carolina was right there. It was Florida State, Georgia, Texas, a little bit of Southern Cal, but South Carolina was definitely in there. But he ends up sticking with Florida State, which is where it became big that South Carolina was able to land Christian Ingram and Xavier Hardy because of we've talked about it a lot, but the numbers, like they had to add some either high school or JUCO guys, and so not getting Kevin Wynn, that was unfortunate for them because he's a really good player, but they did add Xavier Hardy and Christian Ingram and Caleb Williams as well as guys who kind of take that spot.
Yeah, there might be 3 more I'd bring up really quick just before we get out of here. David Sanders, the offensive tackle, committed to Tennessee, 5-star guy. I think I'm saying his name right. I think it's David Sanders.
Yeah.
He's I don't know if he's actually signed today, but he played a lot of NIL recruiting games, and I think that he might end up being a first-round pick one day in the NFL. But for his demands, I'm not going to say publicly what his demands were, but they were astronomical. Elijah Griffin was a guy that the Gamecocks had some staying power in over the summer. Some might have even said they were, number 1, number 2 in his recruitment, but I think that he was always going to be a Georgia Bulldog at the end of the day. He did sign with them. And then the last guy is Jalen Gilchrist. For a long time, it looked like, top 100, top 250. I can't remember where he ended up in the rankings, but offensive tackle, had a lot of love for South Carolina. Ended up staying home, going to Maryland, and he's stuck with Maryland today. But outside of that, I really can't think of anybody that was on the fence, like big time guys.
Yeah, that was really the only ones that thinking of. I'm not sure if David Sanders ended up signing today, but I think it was either.
I heard he was waiting for that check to clear before he put his pen to paper.
It's either going to be
lines
Tennessee or Ohio State. I think probably for him.
Yeah. Trying to think. I mean, we had some decommitments. Who was a linebacker that went to LSU?
Jaden Breaker.
Yeah, Jaden Breaker was the guy the Gamecocks identified.
He's really good. He's really good.
He's going to be a really good player. I mean, that's a miss, but he was somebody that wanted the brand name.
Michael Clayton, cornerback, ended up sticking with Rutgers. South Carolina was going after, but he ended up sticking there with Rutgers.
Yeah. The kid that went to Southern Cal or stuck with Southern Cal.
Steve Miller, who's at Greene County with Kevin Wynn. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like overall, and this is where we'll leave it tonight, Alex. I think the Gamecocks signed, I would say, the best possible class they could.
Yeah.
Given last year, because you have to remember, recruiting is always what did you do last year, and then what have you done this year? But last year means more because the relationships are built, and then it's just like making sure that you're doing what you said you were going to do this year. From wins-loss record, relationship, recruiting guys, all of that. So I think the Gamecocks are set up really well in 2026. I think the Gamecocks are really set up well for the portal. I know that NIL is in a good spot at South Carolina. It could be in a better spot. So if you are so inclined to want to contribute to that, you reach out to JC Sherbert, Garnet Trust. You can do that. I know a lot of people are starting to do $10 a month. The power of collective matters, but I think the Gamecocks are in a decent spot and they're going to be able to get people out of the portal that are going to be difference makers for next year. Outside of that, Alex, anything else? Yeah, you feel like we need to get off our chest?
I think we really hit it all tonight. Had the basketball. How about I was thinking about this during basketball. How about the SEC in this challenge right now? Last night we're up. Not South Carolina or the SEC was up 9-1 in the challenge, and I think the only win was Clemson. Yeah, then I haven't checked the scores tonight. I know Auburn and Duke and Mississippi State and Pitt were playing, but basketball is heating up, and not only in South Carolina but around the country. But I think as far as tonight, I think we really kind of got it all. We got basketball and all the recruiting done.
Yeah, I agree, and we had so much more content that's still going to come out. Like, it's crazy, Alex. Like, it feels like it's the end, but it's just the beginning because it's a vicious cycle. Now it's 2026 and portal season, and it never stops.
It never stops. It's always going.
But again, everyone, check out thebigspur.com. You're not going to get any better information anywhere. So go to thebigspur.com. I know they had some like cyber deals that are going on. I think you can still probably find a deal on there. The annual package is always the best way to go, but that's the best place to find me and Alex outside of this show and outside of the comment box. But that's going to do it for tonight. We appreciate all of you so much for being here with us. When you give us your time, you give us the most valuable thing you have, and it's never forgotten and it's never underappreciated. So thank you for spending time with us tonight. And we will be back Sunday night for the Rooster Rant with Joe. And we'll talk about the week that was. Maybe there'll be some news. And then Alex and I will be back. Alex, before we get out of here, let me double check that. I know the Gamecocks play Saturday night.
Basketball doesn't play middle of the week next week.
Okay, so we'll be back Tuesday night next week.
Yeah.
Tuesday night, 8 p.m. You can find us, and we'll remind you guys on the show with Joe on Sunday night. So we'll see you Sunday. Thanks again for hanging out with us tonight. We hope you all have a great rest of the week, and we wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays as we move into December. Hope you all have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.